Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we are going to be going over all of the Overclocks in Deepcore Galactic, and we're going to be putting them in a tier list. This includes all the new secondary weapons and all of their Overclocks. If you're looking for a particular weapon, be sure to check out the timestamps. Hopefully I put them down below. That way you can just skip ahead to whatever weapon you would like to see, or whatever Overclocks you're going to see. We're going to be doing this in class sections. So first up we're going to have Driller. Then I think it's Gunner, and then Engineer and Scout, I want to say, in that order. The order might get mixed up as we go on. We'll figure it out as we go. So before I start this, I would like to go over what the tiers kind of are / mean for me making this list. S tier is just really strong, very maybe overtuned, maybe overpowered overclocks. Just ones that work really well in the majority of situations, so will work on most missions. Then we have A tier, which is all around solid overclocks, very good. They're usually going to work on the majority of missions. They may not be as overtuned as some of the stuff in S tier, but they're still going to be really solid. B tier is also pretty good overclocks, better than average, better than just not having an overclock on your weapon usually, or they might suit for the majority of roles. C tier is going to be situational ones / ones that I might have a bias towards. I'm not going to lie. There's quite a few overclocks in this that I don't particularly like, even though I don't really have a reason as to why I don't like them. Just the way that they play is not my style. So if you see some overclocks here, that might be the reason. They also might be very heavily specialized to where they work really well on one type of mission, but not so great on other types of missions. And then D tier are overclocks that I think should get fixed, changed, whatever it might be. And just kind of generally underpowered overclocks. So there's going to be a lot of overclocks in like the A and B tier because the majority of overclocks in Deepcore are quite good. First up, we're going to be starting out with the Flamethrower, and our first one is lighter tanks. This one increases our capacity. This one's by 75, I believe. That's all it does. It's really good. If you want to take it. I'm going to put it into B tier. It's a good overclock. It just makes the Flamethrower better. The Flamethrower is already really good. Flamethrower got better because of the robots being added. Fire got a lot better because of that too. Sticky additive, I'm also going to put into B tier. It's a good overclock. It gives you slightly more damage and slightly longer sticky flames, I believe. Both of which are good, and I think belong into B tier. Then we've got compact feed valve. This shortens your range, but gives you more fuel and more tank capacity. Also a really solid overclock. Probably B or A tier. I'm going to put this one up into A tier. You could argue that lighter tanks are better than it, and it really depends on what you want to use it for. Both are pretty solid though. Pretty much the Flamethrower doesn't have any bad overclocks. They're all good ones. Then we've got Fuel Stream Diffuser. This one is also really good. This one increases the reach of your flame by 5 more meters, I believe, but makes it so your flow rate is smaller, or I guess less, so you don't spit out flames as fast, or your DPS is lower. It doesn't really matter if you're just trying to light them on fire, especially with the robots. So Fuel Stream I'd also put into B tier. It's quite good. Then we've got Face Melter. I'm just going to put Face Melter right up into S tier. It's really strong. You get a lot of damage per second. It works really well against most enemies. So long as you're okay with the downsides of having less tank size and less reach. And either one of those you can make up for, because in your tier 1 you get to pick one or the other. So you can still have decent reach with the Flamethrower, or you can stay with that very short reach, but very high damage and have a larger magazine capacity. That's usually what I run. It works really well on Dreadnought missions. It can clear up most enemies really fast. I would also put Sticky Flames up into S tier. Sticky Flames is really strong, deals damage over time, very ammo efficient, even though it cuts down on your magazine size and cuts down on your total ammo. The amount of Sticky Flame duration you have, and that you can put more on there. So Flamethrower starts us out really strong, nothing but good overclocks. You may even want to move lightweight tanks up to A tier. It's really good too. Then we move on to the Cryocannon, where we have improved thermal efficiency. This one gives us more ammo. It also makes it so our pressure drop rate is not as bad as it was. So that's good. This one's just a bonus. I'd put this one up into A tier. Makes it really efficient for freezing things. More ammo is always good. Although you could argue that you don't need more ammo with the Cryocannon. Even so, this is just a bonus to it. So very strong. Tuned Cooler, still S tier. Still one of the best overclocks in the game, I would say, because it lets you just freeze things so fast. The only real downside to this one is the charge up time, which you can mitigate just by taking the faster charge up time in tier 1, and there you go. You can make it so you can freeze things super quick, makes it so you're super ammo efficient. If you really like using your drills as weapons too, this one's really good. Flow rate expansion is going to be our first C tier overclock. This one is just one that I don't really care for. It's not necessarily a bad one. So you can freeze things quicker than you normally would with the flow rate, but there's something about it that just feels off to me. I don't know how to really explain it. If you really like flow rate expansion and you think it should go higher, I completely understand that. But for me, it changes the gun to be so odd that I just don't really use it all that much. Then we've got Ice Spear. Ice Spear I'd probably put up into A tier because you don't really need to use Ice Spear. And Ice Spear doesn't really come at any downside if you're not using the Ice Spear part of it. If you do want to use the Ice Spear part, it does cost a lot, but it does really high damage. You can one-shot menaces on any difficulty with this, which is great, so long as you hit him in the weak spot. I think if you hit him anywhere else, it doesn't one-shot him, but it still takes a big chunk of health out. It's also great on like Dreadnought missions. Then we've got Ice Storm. Ice Storm, I'd put up into A tier as well. Ice Storm can be really good. It can also run through ammo fast, though. That's the one downside to Ice Storm. You deal double damage and double damage to ice targets, or double damage to frozen targets, so you double your damage and then you double it again, but you can't freeze things as fast, you lose out on tank capacity, and your pressure drop rate is worse. Those can all be bad things, but so long as you're not spraying this out in huge amounts, you can kill things fairly fast. It can kill big enemies really quick. It's similar to using the Cryocannon like the Flamethrower. So if you want to have a weapon like that, but you like the ice effect better than the fire effect, Ice Storm might be a go-to for you. It's certainly strong in like Dreadnought missions, and it can be strong on most missions, I would say, against most enemies. It honestly depends on what you're taking as a secondary. I found if you take a secondary that doesn't have a whole lot of ammo, you can run into ammo issues. So if you're taking like Explosive Reload Subata with this, you might run into ammo issues, but overall it's pretty good. Snowball, I think I'm going to put Snowball into B tier. Snowball's really, really good on MacTerra missions, and it can be really good on like Swarmageddon or just where you're getting a lot of swarms. So if you're going on like a point extract or something, Snowball, unlike Ice Spear, does come with a downside where it cuts down on tank capacity. You can still fire out the Snowball though. You do this by pushing R. For anybody unaware, same goes with Ice Spear. This shoots out a Snowball, works very similar to a Cryo Grenade from Scout. Freeze all enemies around you. If you freeze any of the flying enemies, you will kill them instantly, which is fantastic. It can also just be good against any of the small enemies or against like exploders, even though you can just freeze them normally without using the Snowball. You want to mostly save this for crowds, and for that it can still run into ammo issues, but it is a really fun overclock. I do really like it. So then we move on to the Sludge Pump, and Sludge Pump got buffed in the Season 2 update, which is pretty awesome. It got better just by itself, as well as some of these overclocks did get changed. Hydrogen ion additive was not one of the ones that got changed. However, this one is still really good. This one increases your damage over time effect, as well as the slowdown effect of that damage over time effect. So this one is just a buff to the weapon. It's pretty good. It lets you get a little bit more DPS out of the weapon. I think I'd put this one up into B tier. There's no real downside to it. The upsides are still pretty good though, so I could see you arguing this to A tier. Then we've got AG Mixture. This one increases your projectile's velocity by 30%. It used to be 20%, I believe. Now it's 30%. And your projectile is less affected by gravity, so it's easier to shoot this in a straight line. I believe that the velocity in Tier 1 also got buffed on the Sludge Pump, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Either way, if you want to stack both those, you can shoot a projectile extremely straight. It does feel like you can just kind of snipe things. You still have to account for your weapon not being a hit scan, though. It still is a projectile that has to take time to get there, so you still may need to lead your shot, but not as much as you normally would with the Sludge Pump, nor will you have to account for the arc as much with the Sludge Pump. So this one I still don't really use all that much, but it is better than it once was. I'm going to put this at the very high end of C tier. I guess I'll put these just at the end of each of these things, just so that it's easier to sort through when you're looking through them. But if I had to say this one's like high C tier or low B tier, it's a nice overclock. It's not necessary with the Sludge Pump. Once you get used to the drop and once you get used to the velocity, you can still use the Sludge Pump at like short to medium range, just not very long range. With this, you can use it in a long range, so if you really want to use it, then I would say take it. There's no real downside to it. It's just not one that I particularly go for, so that's why it's down here. Then we have Volatile Impact Mixture, which this one got buffed. This one got buffed a lot, and this one was already really strong. This one doubles your regular shot damage, doubles your charge shot damage, but cuts down on your damage over time, as well as the sludge puddle duration, which is not a huge deal. You're going to be dealing so much damage per second with this one, and so much damage per shot. It also doesn't affect your ammo for some reason, like a lot of the overclocks that give you this amount of damage do. So you can just shred through just about everything with this. And this one, I think I'd put up into S tier now. It's really good. It's surprising how quickly you can just shred through enemies with it. Then we have Disperser Compound. Disperser Compound is another good overclock. This is what I would say previously was the best overclock for the Sludge Pump, but I think Volatile Impact is now better than it, at least in my opinion. It depends on what you want to use it for. This is better for bigger targets, like if you want to take it on Dreadnought missions or if you want to kill like Praetorians with it. The Disperser's better for crowd control. This one makes it so you get more charge fragments. This one gives you more fragment area damage, but less charge shot damage. That's not a huge deal when you can just cover a whole area, and if you can light it on fire, whether it be you or your team, you can kill a lot of enemies really fast. Disperser Compound I'd put high up into A tier, bordering on S tier. It's also really good. Maybe not as good as Volatile Impact, but very strong. Then we've got Goop Bomber Special. Goop Bomber Special didn't get changed. This one, you just shoot in a straight line. It lays down a bunch of goo. Any enemy walking across it will take a lot of damage per second. You can cut off certain areas, and on some missions, this one's really strong, like on salvage missions or on escort missions. Any hold the point or protect the area or protect the drill dozer, whatever it might be mission. This one can be really good. On other missions where you're actively moving around, it's honestly not way great. The downsides are really not that big a deal, especially if you just plan on only using this for crowds or for area denial, and then just are spam shooting the rest of the time. So this one I'd also probably put up into B tier. I think it's pretty good. And then we have Sludge Blast, which Sludge Blast last time got into D tier because it had so many downsides, which I honestly don't think was super fair to Sludge Blast. It probably belonged in C tier because it was still really, really strong on Dreadnought missions. Now Sludge Blast has been buffed to where you get an acid shotgun that fires out your balls really, really fast. It gives you less charge shot area damage and less ammo, as well as a slightly longer reload time, but it doesn't have as many downsides as it did before. So this one now is really good with all the buffs that the Sludge Pump got, and the fact that this one no longer takes a percentage of your ammo, it just takes a flat amount of your ammo. That makes this a really enticing option. It still can run into ammo issues occasionally that I've found, but it is really, really good. I'd put this one up into A tier. I would say it's S tier on like elimination missions if you want to take this on Dreadnought missions, or if you just really hate things like oppressors, try out Sludge Blast because you will just shred right through them in no time. It's also really good against Bacteria Plagues too because it's very easy to hit a bunch of them with a shotgun. I would also say that the Sludge Pump is similar to the Flamethrower now, with no bad overclocks or no real weird overclocks. The lowest one I would say is like AG Mixture, which that one's just personal preference. If you like it, cool. If you don't, like me, then you're probably just not going to use it. Then we move on to the Subata, which is a weapon that a lot of people like to hate on, especially since it didn't get buffed in this patch. I think it probably should in some way. Maybe give it another tier 5, make it complement some of the other primaries weapons a little bit better, because it still works really well with the Flamethrower. And it can work really well with the other two. It's just with the other weapons having either a lot of utility or really complementing the primary weapons. Subata does feel a little bit underappreciated maybe. Still good though. First up we have Chain Hit. This one makes it so you have a 75% chance of hitting enemies once you hit the weak spot, or at least it bouncing into another enemy. I don't really care for Chain Hit. It is a bonus, so there is that, but it's just not a fun overclock in my opinion to use. You might get a little bit more damage value out of it, which is great, but you're not going to be doing tons of damage with this since the Subata doesn't do tons of damage usually. There is one overclock that lets you do a lot of damage, but this one I'm not a fan of the Chain Hit. Homebrew Powder is kind of the same thing. I'd put it into C tier as well. If you build full damage on the Subata, it's fine. You're not going to low roll if you want to hit Swarmers, which you don't really need to because all the primaries work really well against Swarmers. But even so, if you are shooting Swarmers, it is kind of annoying when you do low roll them. This can make it so you kill big things a little bit faster. You can kill Mactera a little bit quicker. I do actually kind of like running this if I'm running full damage Flamethrower, or at least full heat Flamethrower, and lighting things on fire and then using the tier 5 that gives you more damage with it. Other than that, though, I don't really ever take it. Oversized magazine, I'm going to put this one into, it's either A or B tier. I think I'd put it into A tier if you're running Born Ready. If you're not running Born Ready, then probably B tier. Because with Born Ready, you're never going to need to reload this weapon. So if you're running this as the Flamethrower or the Sludge Pump, you can fire this whole thing out, switch to that weapon, fire that out, switch back, and you'll never need to reload either one of them manually. You'll have enough time in between, which is really nice. If you aren't running Born Ready, which you don't really need on Driller, like if you're taking this to the Cryocannon, it's still good. You still get a lot of bullets with it. It just makes the pistol feel better. It's just it has that longer reload speed, which can be a little bit annoying, but if you don't care about that and you're running full mag size with Born Ready, it's pretty good. Automatic fire I'd also put up into A tier. Not necessarily because automatic fire is great. It's super fun to use, and it makes the Subata feel better, I would say. But it does come with the downside of less accuracy and more recoil. So it can be a bit more difficult to control. It makes it so you can't really use the Subata at really long ranges anymore. It's more for close and medium range. It can still kill like grunts and regular MacTerra pretty quick though. Explosive reload is absolutely A tier. This one's really good. This one gives you a lot of damage with the Subata. You get less ammo overall, but that doesn't really matter when you just stack ammo with it. Just so that you can build up the damage from each of these explosive shots. Makes it so you can kill the flying rocks real quick. Makes it so you can kill most enemies pretty fast. It can run into ammo issues, so you don't want to pair it with something like Sludge Blast or Ice Storm. But if you pair it with like Disperser Compound or Hydrogen Ion Additive or something like that, shouldn't have any problems. Tranq rounds I'm also going to put into A tier just for the utility of them. They have a 6-second stun, which is fantastic. It's, I think, the longest stun in the entire game. Has a very high chance to stun. I wish that this didn't take away your rate of fire, though. The magazine size I don't care about, but the rate of fire does feel kind of sluggish. That's the one downside to Tranq rounds, but it works really well if you have, like, Tri-Jaws incoming. There's a high chance you can just hit them and not worry about them at all. Well, you'll have to worry about them, but for 6 seconds you don't have to worry about them, which is a really long time if you need to get somewhere. Then we move on to the EPC, where we have the energy rerouting, which this one gives you more ammo and a faster charge speed. This one I'm just going to put into S tier. It makes the EPC feel so much better. No matter how you want to build it. If you just want to build it with spam fire, you can. If you want to build it with the thin containment field, you can. If you want to build it flying nightmare, you can. All of them just make it feel better, so I think this one just is up into S tier just for the convenience of it. Now for our other clean overclock, we have magnetic cooling, which is kind of the opposite. This one gives you a better cooling rate, less heat buildup. That's pretty good, but it's not as good as some of the other things that the EPC gets. And once you are used to using like thin containment field, then this one kind of falls off because energy rerouting is just better than it. Pretty much there's always a better alternative to this one, so I'm going to put this one into C tier, because if you want to use like Flying Nightmare, then Overcharger's better. If you want to use the Thin Containment Field, Energy Rerouting, Heat Pipe, and Persistent Plasma are better. If you want to just use it as a Spam Fire build, Heavy Hitter and the Energy Rerouting are also better choices for that. So that's just kind of why you get C tier. It's just not as good as some of the other ones. It's still great if it's the only thing you got. It's definitely better than nothing, and it's great to learn Thin Containment Field mining with this, because it's more forgiving than the other overclocks are. Then we have Heat Pipe. Heat Pipe I'm also going to put into C tier. It is better than Magnetic Cooling, like I said, for thin containment mining, but it has such a narrow window of success or failure, however you want to look at it, where it's so easy to overheat your gun by accident. Now it is really ammo efficient, which is the main draw of it. It's ammo efficient and it builds up charge speed faster, so you can mine quicker, and if you get really used to using it, then it is really good for that. But it's mostly just used for the tool. It's not really used as a weapon anymore because of the charge shot buildup and the heat buildup while you're charging. If you still want to just shoot it one shot at a time, it's perfectly fine then. Heavy Hitter I'd probably put into A tier. Heavy Hitter's good. You can build it for single target damage. You can build it for fire. It just makes it so your gun hits a lot harder. The downsides aren't that big a deal, where you lose out on ammo capacity and then you build up more heat. But when you're dealing quite a bit more damage, I feel like that's an even trade-off. Overcharger I'm also going to put into A tier. If you like using Flying Nightmare, if you like using charge shots, this one you're definitely going to like. Downside is that it's less ammo efficient, so you will run through ammo a bit quicker, but you do get a more powerful weapon. And then we have Persistent Plasma, which I'd probably also put up into S tier. This one's really good. You get Persistent Plasma, which deals damage over time as well as slows all enemies in an area. Your friends can actually run through this as well. It doesn't hurt them. The downsides are that you get less charge shot damage, less area damage, but that doesn't matter once your Persistent Plasma ticks, I think it's 2 or 3 times, then it has already done more damage than what the regular shot hitting an enemy would do anyway. So you can just cover more area, hit more enemies, and have a longer lasting damage over time. The downside really isn't much of a downside. It actually makes it more of an upside, because the only thing that can cause friendly fire damage is the initial shot. So even if you hit teammates with this, doesn't really matter all that much. All right, then we move on to our latest driller weapon, which is the Wave Cooker. And first up, we have Liquid Cooling System. This one cuts down on heat generation, makes it so your cooling is better, and cuts down on overheat duration. All really good things, all really nice things to have on the Wave Cooker. And I think I'm going to put this one up into A tier. It feels really nice to have. You can run it on any build that you want, and the wave cooker is really customizable. It pairs well with any of the primary weapons, depending on how you want to build it. It's also great for just hitting enemies at a distance, so if you need to take out a bunch of jellyfish or something, you can do that, especially if you like switching on the wide lens. Up next, we have the super focus lens. This one gives us more damage so long as we're at close range to enemies. No other bonus or downside to that. This one I'm going to put into B tier. It's nice. If you have like slowdowns on the Sludge Pump, I would say it's better. You can also get a bit more damage if you're using like the Cryocannon, especially with Tomb Cooler or something to freeze stuff, so then you just walk right up to it and do a little bit more damage while you're hitting it. Then we have Diffusion Ray. This one lowers your damage slightly, but slows down all enemies that you hit and allows you to penetrate 3 enemies. The Wave Cooker has infinite range, so hitting multiple enemies is great. This one I'd probably put up into A tier. This one works really well in like a temperature shock build, or even if you're just running it on like the Sludge Pump build where you're just slowing things down. Then we've got Magnetic Power Supply. This one gives us more ammo and a faster rate of fire, less cooling rate, and a longer overheat duration. So long as you're not overheating the weapon, this is nothing but a bonus. And if you're switching this with a temperature shock build, it's really, really strong. With a temperature shock build, I might say it's S tier. Like if you're really running Sticky Flames or Tomb Cooler or something like that, and you just are trying to build up either heat or build up cold. Otherwise, I think I'd put it A tier. And most of the time, I would say it's A tier because it does work really well with all the other builds too. It works really well with those particular builds. Blistering Necrosis. This one has a 10% chance whenever we hit an enemy to spawn the blisters on an enemy. If those get popped, the enemy takes extra damage. They can be popped from any source, at least any ally source, so your weapons, friendly weapons, whatever it might be. It does cause more heat buildup on the weapon, and it does cause a longer cooldown on the weapon, though. So you might overheat the weapon more often. The blisters can do decent damage, especially if you get a bunch of them to spawn, but the chance of them to spawn is kind of low, so it's not always the most consistent overclock. Still pretty good, though. I think I'd put Blistering Necrosis on the low end of A tier. I don't think it's as good as the balanced overclocks, or even as good as the liquid cooling system, but it's still pretty good. Then we have Gamma Contamination. This one is the radiation one. We have a chance of inflicting radiation to enemies. This one does a lot of damage, and it takes for a long time because it does like 22 damage for 7 seconds, or 22 damage a second for 7 seconds. So you can do a lot of damage over time, as well as this radiates to other enemies. It slows down enemies. Downsides are we have a more narrow shot, we have less direct damage, and we have less magazine size. Those ones are kind of downsides, but I'd still probably put this one up into A tier. It's still pretty good. Again, I don't think it's as good as these other ones. So as you can see here, Driller has pretty good overclocks across the board. A lot of really good ones. A few that are just kind of situational or don't do the most. But I don't think they have any that really need to be buffed a lot. Maybe some that need to be slightly reworked, like Homebrew Powder or Chain Head or something. I don't really care for those mechanics. That's about it. The rest I think are fine. Maybe give Magnetic Cooling a slight buff or something too. Alright, now that we've talked about Driller's overclocks, we're going to move on to Gunner. And first up, we got the Minigun overclocks. First up, we have a little more oomph. This gives us a faster spin up and more damage. This one's really good. I really enjoy this one. I'm going to put this one up into A tier. It feels really great to have the 0.1 second spin up on the minigun. There's no downtime with it then. The minigun's already a pretty solid weapon. This just makes it even better. Thin drum walls gives us more magazine size and faster cooling rate, both of which are nice. I think I'd put this one in B tier. It's not super necessary, but it is a nice buff. Then we've got Burning Hell. This one makes it so we essentially have a short-range flamethrower in front of our minigun. Our gun can overheat quicker, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because we can make it so it spreads heat to multiple enemies. Really good overclock. I would put this one up into A tier, potentially like S tier on like Swarmageddon. It's really good for that mission. Then we have the Compact Feeding Mechanism. This one's also pretty fun. This one lowers your rate of fire, gives you a lot more ammo. I'd say B tier as well. Then we have Exhaust Vectoring. This one gives us more damage, but increases our base spread. The spread isn't that bad, especially if we take the less spread in tier 1. The extra damage is nice, so I'd put it up into A tier. And then we have Bullet Hell. This one makes it so all of our bullets have a chance of ricocheting into nearby enemies once they hit a surface. That also counts for other enemies. But we lose out on a good amount of damage, and we have 6 times the base spread. So a super fun overclock, but I think I'm actually going to have to put Bullet Hell into C tier. As much as I love it, it's one of my absolute favorite overclocks in the game, and one that I use really often. It's still not as great as taking like a full AoE Hurricane, or a full AoE, or not even a full AoE, but just an AoE autocannon. those will usually do the job a little bit better. Yes, you can build for fire and build, you know, all these other kind of things. You want to build damage on it so you don't have to 3-shot swarmers and stuff. In that way, then bullet hell is super, super fun and one of my favorite overclocks to use, but you can run through bullets with it pretty fast. And there are times where it feels really inconsistent, where you're just not getting a whole lot of bullets to actually hit enemies that you want to hit. So that's why I'm going to put it into C tier, even though it pains me to do that. And Leadstorm, though, I would put up into A tier. Leadstorm's pretty good. You could argue it into S tier for like Dreadnought missions. It's really strong on Dreadnought missions. You can build at full damage and do a lot of damage per second. It's probably your most consistent amount of damage per second out of any of your weapons, because the autocannon can potentially do more, but the autocannon's not super accurate. And then the Hurricane can also do pretty high damage with like homebrew powder, but that comes with its own kind of cons to it. Then we have the autocannons overclocks, where first up we have composite drums. This one's probably the weakest autocannon overclock, I guess. It gives you more ammo and a slightly faster reload speed. You don't necessarily need more ammo with the autocannon, but it's not bad. B tier. That's about as bad as the overclocks for the autocannon get, is that they're still better than average, or still above average. Splintering shells, really good. This one gives you more damage and more AoE, so really strong. I'd put this one up into A tier. Carpet Bomber also gives you more AoE and more area damage, but less direct damage. This one I'd also say is A tier. I'd say it's not as strong as Splintering Shells, just because Splintering Shells doesn't come with the downside, and you can build it to where it's still doing decent damage for regular targets, as well as still does really well against crowds. Carpet Bomber is mostly for crowds and then doesn't do very well against big single targets. It is pretty noticeable how much longer it takes for you to kill big things with Carpet Bomber. Combat mobility I'd also put into B tier. It's good. I like it a lot. The increased movement speed is really nice. You don't really feel like you're slowing down all that much with Gunners, since you have to slow down with all of Gunner's primary weapons. Base spread is improved. Rate of fire is improved. The rate of fire buildup is improved, which is all great. Magazine size is cut in half, though. That can be a little bit of a pain. You can build this full tank, though, and after you fire 2 shots, then you're up to your 50% damage reduction, which that was cool that got buffed. So combat mobility, I guess, kind of indirectly got buffed, at least the way that I build combat mobility. Big Berth, I'd also say, is A tier. The extra damage is really nice. You do a lot of damage to single targets. You can still do decent damage to crowds, but this does cut down on your top rate of fire, does cut down on magazine size, and it does cut down on ammo. Does make your gun more accurate, though, which is nice. So you can actually be hitting enemies at medium range pretty reasonably often. Longer range is still not way great for the autocannon, but at that medium range, you can really do some damage to like Dreadnoughts, Praetorians, Oppressors, anything big. Neurotoxin payload is still S tier. Neurotoxin payload is crazy good, especially with the tier 5 fear on it, because every round can then slow down enemies, deal damage over time, and fear enemies so that they're more likely to be running around. Enemies are feared, they're not attacking you, they're taking the damage over time. Damage over time can be fairly significant too, and every shot splinters, so every shot, even if you don't hit anything directly, still has the extra AoE to where it can hit enemies. Downsides are that you lose damage and lose area damage, but not by that much. And the area damage really doesn't matter, because the poison is going to do more damage than the area damage will anyway. Direct damage does kind of suck, because you won't be killing big things very fast. It does take a while to kill with neurotoxin payload, at least alone on like Praetorians, Oppressors, stuff like that, but it shreds through crowds super well. Yeah, and then just the fact that everything gets slowed down by the neurotoxin is even better, because if you are playing on like Hazard 5 where enemies move faster than you, this makes it so that you can outrun them if they are affected by the neurotoxin. Alright, and then we move on to the Hurricane, where we have our first D tier overclock, which is manual guidance cutoff. This one still is not way great. This one increases your projectile velocity, which is good. I do like that. Downside is, though, is as soon as you release the trigger, you no longer have a guidance system. So your rockets will just go straight after you let go, whereas otherwise you could still guide them by just moving your crosshair on enemies. That is one thing that's very unique about the Hurricane, and one really nice thing about it, because it gives you very long effective range. With you losing out on it, it honestly is nothing but a downside, and the extra velocity is nice, but you have other overclocks that also give you velocity, so it's just not really worth taking this one. If this one also like increased your damage once you let go of it, or something, gave you something else for just cutting off your guidance system, it might be worth it then. Right now, it just isn't. Then we have Overtune and Feed Mechanism. This one gives us more velocity, well, not quite as much as Manual Guidance Cutoff, but similar, and gives us a faster rate of fire. That is really good for the Hurricane, and that one I would definitely put up into A tier. It's very strong, makes the Hurricane just feel a whole lot better than it already does. Hurricane is already pretty strong, but adding this on top of it makes it even better. Fragmentation Missiles, I think I'd put into B tier. Giving you extra AoE and extra area damage is nice. If you like using this for area denial, it's really good. Then we have Plasma Burster Missiles, which Plasma Burster Missiles can kind of vary. They did get buffed by getting fixed, so now they no longer have the chance of just, once they hit the ground, just exploding and then you don't have a missile anymore. That is nice. It still has the added effect of you can one-shot boulders with it. I don't know why that's still in the game, but apparently it's a feature now and it was not a bug. And this can do a lot more damage per second, just because you can't have so many of these out hitting multiple targets. Either way, I'd put this one into A tier. Once you get really used to Plasma Burster Missiles, it is really good. Before that, it can feel a little bit clunky and kind of janky. It doesn't feel super strong, because with the regular Hurricane, you usually just fire at something until it's dead. With this one, you kind of want to weave them back and forth through crowds and through big enemies. Mine Layer System, I would also put up in A tier. This one makes it so you can put down your rockets into a minefield. This gives you less overall ammo, and your missiles are now no longer guided, so you can't weave them around like you could with like Plasma Burster Missiles or most of your other things. But when they are sticking in the ground, they do a lot more damage than they normally do. A lot of area damage. They do scale off your area damage. You can build them for fire and set up fire mines, or you can set them up for stun mines, and they work really well there. They could be S tier on certain types of missions because they are really good, but it does depend on your positioning, how you set them up, how fast the enemies are moving, and what type of enemies you're getting. Certain enemies, these just aren't that great against. Mactera in particular, these are pretty bad against, unless you're in a very tight tunnel where they can stick on the ceiling or stick on the walls, and the Mactera are forced to fly down there. But assuming you're in a somewhat open area, then they're really not that great against Mactera, since you no longer have the guidance system for them. Jet Fuel Homebrew's up next. This one's really good. This one gives you a lot more direct damage, a lot more velocity, and your projectiles start out at max velocity, which is really nice. However, you lose out on area damage, you lose out on AoE, you lose out on magazine size, and you lose out on total ammo. This one still I'd put up into A tier. This one is really strong against Dreadnoughts. It's really strong on Dreadnought missions, and I'd probably say it's S tier on Dreadnought missions. Other missions, it's still really good, but you can run into ammo issues. You can build this to where you're two-shotting regular grunts or one-shot headshotting them, which is pretty nice. So you can be ammo efficient if you're willing to build that way. And then we have Salvo Module. This is the shotgun mod, so that you can charge up your shot and fire out all of your missiles at once like a shotgun. This one can do really high damage. You can still tap fire the gun and have no downside to it. This one doesn't really have a downside, other than that you can't hold down the trigger and just keep firing missiles, because that will charge up the shotgun. And for each missile you do charge up with the shotgun, they do a little bit more damage. So that is nice too. I'd put this one up into A tier. It feels like a really solid bonus to the weapon. Alright, then we move on to the Revolver. And the Revolver's got chain hit, so that's going to go into C tier for the same reason why the Subata's chain hit went into C tier. It's just not way great. It is better in the Revolver because you're hitting harder with the Revolver than you are with the Subata. There is a good chance you might kill another enemy with it. And if it's the only overclock that you have with the Revolver, throw it on because it is a bonus. But it's just that the other overclocks are a lot better for them. Then we have Homebrew Powder, which I had said I don't really like Homebrew Powder for the Subata, which I don't. But for the Revolver, it's quite a bit better. I'd put this one up into B tier. This one randomizes your damage between 75% and double damage, so you can potentially high roll. And even if you're low rolling with the Revolver already hits pretty hard, plus it has a bonus weak spot modifier on it, baseline, so you don't need any more mods for that. Still not one of my favorite overclocks for the Revolver, but it is better than the other homebrew powders for the other weapons. Then we have Volatile Bullets. Volatile Bullets is really good. This lowers your damage by 10 with the Revolver, which is not that big of a deal, but it triples your damage if an enemy is on fire and you shoot them with the Revolver. So you can kill big things very, very fast. You can kill detonators super quick with this. You can kill spitballers in like one shot with this. You can kill menaces, I think, in maybe 1 or 2 shots. I guess it depends on how you lit them on fire. Because, yeah, some builds with the Hurricane, you can probably just hit them with 1 bullet afterwards. Same with if you're using Burning Hell with a minigun or something. Volatile Bullets is crazy strong if you build for it. By itself, and you're just using like fire grenades, yeah, it's not going to be as good. But since you do have the Hurricane and you can build fire on it base, it can be really strong. 6-shooter, I'm going to put into A tier. This is just a bonus to the revolver. It feels like just a straight upgrade. You get more magazine size, more ammo, faster rate of fire for a slightly longer reload, and slightly more base spread. The revolver is already super accurate, so you don't have to worry about that all that much. Reload speed does kind of feel worse, but not by that much. Elephant rounds, I think I'd also put into A tier. Last time I put them into S tier, and they are, I would still say S tier with certain overclocks in combination, like with Neurotoxin, if you want to do that, or even Bullet Hell or something down here, or maybe Splintering Shells, anything that gives you AoE. This turns your revolver into a sniper rifle. You deal double damage, and you have half the amount of spread that you normally do, but you lose out on ammo, you lose out on mag size, your reload is longer, your recoil is much bigger, and your spread per shot is much worse. So after you fire once, you definitely do have to wait for your revolver to come back down. That doesn't usually matter though, because at least for me, I'm usually using this to pick off things at very long range or just to deal high damage to high value targets. So if you're just using it for that and you have a bunch of AoE, fragmentation missiles, neurotoxin, whatever it might be, then yeah, you could say this one's S tier because it is really good in combination with those type of builds. And then we have magic bullets. With this one is also still S tier. This one is really good. This one makes it so all of your bullets can now bounce into other enemies. You lose out on 20 damage, which doesn't really matter when you can just build this for explosive rounds and neurotoxin rounds. So now you have explosive neurotoxin rounds, so anytime that you hit near enemies, there's a chance of splashing poison to all of them, dealing damage over time, slowing them all down, and then your bullet jumps to another area, trying to hit an enemy. This can also trigger it again, so you're doing another explosive shot, as well as the shot that's hitting that enemy, and then potentially more neurotoxin around. Makes it really, really good for clearing up crowds really fast. So if you want to do high single target damage, if you want to take like Lead Storm, Magic Bullets is a really strong secondary for it. Then we move on to the Burst Pistol. We have composite casings first. This one gives us more ammo and a faster rate of fire. This one's really good. I like this one. I'm going to put this one up in A tier. There's just not really a downside to it. Burst Pistol's already fairly ammo efficient and has a good rate of fire. Increasing those two things is even better. So yeah, A tier there. Full chamber seal on the other hand though, I'm going to put into C tier. I think this one needs to get buffed a bit. We have 3 damage overclocks for the Burst Pistol, and this one's the weakest of them. This one gives you 1 more damage and a 0.2 second faster reload speed. This one was the least picked overclock on Karl.gg for a while. It might still be, I'm not sure, with all the new weapons added. But this one was the least picked overclock out of all overclocks in the game to build for, which was kind of interesting because this one is still a bonus, and the faster reload speed isn't bad. But when it's just that low amount, you usually just don't really want to take it over the other ones, especially since we have 2 other damage overclocks. Then we have compact mags. This one gives you more ammo overall, less rate of fire, faster reload. This one's really good. It makes it so the Burst Pistol is really ammo efficient. It pairs well as a secondary with pretty much any of the weapons then, so I'd put this one up into A tier. Then we have experimental rounds. This one gives you 9 more damage, but cuts down on ammo and cuts down on mag size. This one's still probably A tier. It's really good. You can build this to where you can just one burst regular grunts just by hitting them in the body. You could just build it all for ammo though too, and then you can one shot, or I guess one burst headshot most enemies like slashers and grunts. And you can build up a lot of damage per second with the experimental rounds, so it's pretty good. If you build it all for like the one burst body shot stuff, you're going to run through ammo pretty quick, but it can still work on like an AoE build. So if you're only really using it for picking off things like Mactera or using it on oppressors, Praetorian, stuff like that, can still be really good. Then we have Electro Mindlets. This one's pretty good too. If you want another AoE option, this one's a great choice. I'd put this one up into A tier. So if you really like Lead Storm, Salvo Module, Jet Fuel Homebrew, well, I guess somewhat Salvo Module, Electro Mindlets makes a good secondary choice because it deals damage over time. You can pair it with blow-through rounds and hit through multiple enemies. Downsides are that you lose out on damage and mag size. That doesn't really matter because the electricity is going to do more damage per second than the damage you put on there had anyway. And the mag size doesn't really matter either because the slowdown, and if you just build for either a larger magazine or if you build it for a faster reload, it's not going to be a huge deal. I think I'm going to put Micro Flechettes into B tier. It's A or B tier, depends on how you want to build it and what you want to pair it with. You can make it so it's a stunning machine because this does give you double the ammo, 30 more mag size, half the recoil, half the spread, but it does cut down on your damage a lot. If you build it all for damage, it feels okay. If you build it for stunning, It feels a little bit better in my opinion, and you can use it to stun things like Nectera easier. Also, since you have less recoil and less spread per shot, it's really easy to keep on target for very long ranges, because even though it's 3-round burst, it doesn't jump around that much. Lead Spray this time around, I'm just going to put up into S tier. It's really good. This one gives you 50% more damage, but you have 4 times the base spread, so you don't really have that much range anymore. Burst Pistol struggles at like longer than medium range now, but it does really high damage at close range, and it's really strong on Dreadnought missions, or if you just need to take out oppressors, Praetorians, stuff like that at very close range. Lead Spray is a really great option. And then we move on to the coil gun, where our clean overclock is the ultra magnetic coils. This gives us a longer trail duration and a larger trail radius, both of which are good. This feels like a nice buff to the weapon. I'd put it up into B tier. It's a good clean overclock. Backfeed module gives us more ammo but less damage. I think I'd also put this one in B tier. It feels nice. With the electric trail, the damage isn't that bad. You can make it so you can fire it with the overcharge shot too, and then just have more ammo overall. You can fire it with a faster charge up. It still has the ability to punch through walls, so you can still save your teammates from like leeches and stuff. So that's pretty nice, but I don't think it's one of the best overclocks for the weapon. I think it's still decent though. Reatomizer I'm also going to put into B tier. You know what? I'm going to put Reatomizer into C tier. Reatomizer is honestly not bad. It really isn't. It's just that it takes a lot of steps to put it to good use. This makes it so you can spread ailments to any enemy behind the enemy that you hit. So if an enemy is being affected by like neurotoxin, you fire it through them. You can inflict neurotoxin to anything that's behind them. That means that that enemy has to be inflicted with neurotoxin, and then you have to line up a shot between that enemy and another enemy to get it to work. That can take a lot of time to set up and not always worth it. The downside is not that bad for Reatomizer though, it's just a slightly longer reload. So if you're using Born Ready already, you could just take this and say that it's no downside whatsoever. I think that's a fair opinion to have too. But I think I just keep it into C tier for this reason, because it's just not one of my favorite ones. I do have a bias towards some of these. This is one of them, similar to like flow rate expansion. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on Reatomizer as to where you would put it. Then we have the Mole, which the Mole I'm just going to put up into S tier too. It's really good. This makes it so punching through multiple terrain, or just any terrain, gives you a lot more damage once you actually connect with a target. You can also punch through more terrain than you normally would. But you have a slightly longer charge speed, which is not really that noticeable to me. Building full damage on the Mole is really good. Building just the charge speed on it is also really good. And it just completely shreds through things like Dreadnoughts. It can shred through Nemesis. It can do a lot of damage to the Caretaker. It's just really, really good. You can also do like the cheese tactic, quite literally the cheese tactic of make a Swiss cheese tunnel and then fire the Mole through it and just deal a crazy amount of damage to enemies. That's not really practical, but it is something that you can do. Then we have Hellfire, which Hellfire is really good too. Hellfire makes it so once you fire a shot, it ignites everything around it. It just creates a big tunnel of fire, more or less. But we lose out on ammo, we lose out on charge speed, and we have less trail duration. The trail duration was added recently. It used to last for 5 seconds, where it was really strong, because this does build up heat really fast, and it's really good against robots. It can still build up heat on robots and light them on fire, especially if it's turrets where they can't move. For the flying drones, there's a chance that they might get out of it, but if they are flying towards you slowly or flying away from you slowly, you will still likely light them on fire and kill them. I'm honestly thinking between either A tier, like high end A tier, or low end of S tier. I don't think this is as good as the Mole, but it is really strong. I think I'm going to put Hellfire on the low end of S tier. I think I'll keep it there. Then we have Triple Tech Chamber. This one makes it so we can fire up to 3 rounds from our burst pistol, from our coil gun. It kind of acts like the burst pistol, but they are a lot more powerful. Downsides to this is that you can't shoot it quick because it has so much recoil. You do have to take your time, and there is a 1 second delay before your person will just try to reload. So you have a limited amount of time where you can fire this. You can put electricity trails on this and run it with like the less charge shot needed for you to fire, do a lot of AoE damage, and cover a big area with slowdowns. It's also pretty good if you just want to charge it up and keep hitting the same enemy multiple times, or multiple enemies in a tight location. Downsides to this one is that it has a longer reload and that it has a slower charge. And I guess it has stronger recoil too. But that's just firing 3 shots. This one I'd also put into A tier. It's really good. All right, then we move on to Scout. I think I said I would do Scout last, but I guess they popped up next on here. So it'll be Scout, then Engineer. First up, we have compact ammo for the GK2. This gives us less recoil and a larger mag. This one's nice. I'd put it into B tier. I like having this one in the GK2. Gas rerouting gives us a slightly faster rate of fire and gives us a slightly faster reload. This one's also good. I'd put it up into B tier. It's kind of just nice to have on the weapon. Homebrew powder I'd put also into C tier for the same reason as the Subata. If you build a full damage on the GK2, then you're not low rolling on swarmers, which is nice, and you can kill things like grunts a little bit quicker, but it's still rather annoying to have. And it's just not one of my favorite overclocks in the game. Firing mechanism I'd put up into A tier, I think. This one gives us a lot more rate of fire, but more recoil. Recoil isn't so bad on the GK2. It's pretty easy to manage. It's not super uncontrollable, and after you fire for a little bit, the recoil becomes really manageable. So, yeah, I think A tier is where it belongs. Bullets of Mercy got kind of indirectly buffed in this last patch, which is nice. It was already probably the best overclock for the GK2, and I'm going to put it up into S tier. It's just really good. Pretty much every team is going to have some sort of element on it, whether you're using fire, stun, electrocution, frozen, neurotoxin, corrosive sludge, whatever it might be. The downside to this is that you have 5 less magazine size, which doesn't even matter. Who cares if your magazine is slightly smaller for you getting another 33% damage on top of that? Yeah, this one's just S tier, especially since everybody's now running status effects, and you can run multiple status effects, especially now that you have the crossbow that can have status effects even without overclocks on it, which is nice. AI Stability Engine, this one's A tier. No recoil and no spread is awesome, as well as 40% more weak spot damage is great. Less damage and less rate of fire kind of sucks, especially the less rate of fire. It does feel a little bit more sluggish when you're firing this, but the fact that you can just have a laser weapon that you just hold on to an enemy and just deal a lot of damage is pretty nice. Electrifying Reload I would also probably put up into A tier now. It did get slightly buffed with it just having a magazine reduction and an ammo reduction rather than a damage reduction, which makes it so you don't have to worry about building damage. You can build ammo for it, which is great. That way you can still one-shot swarmers, and you can deal more damage over time with it. It's honestly probably A tier in solo. In multiplayer, it might be like B tier. Everybody's going to have everything dead by the time you're spread out all your shots, and then go to reload, and then you're slowly waiting for it to tick down. It's not one of the best damage over time effects. It's not better than any of Driller's primaries. It's not better than like the Autocannon or like Neurotoxin Payload for just spreading damage out over time, but it's okay. Hover Clock is kind of an odd one. I'm just going to put it up into A tier right now. It depends on how much you like it. It lets you float in the air while you're using a focus shot. If you like that, awesome. If you don't like it, then just don't pick it. And that's why I'm putting it into A tier, because it doesn't necessarily give you that much of an advantage. It does make it so you don't have to worry about fall damage as much, and to where you can make certain jumps and stuff. But it's more for fun than necessarily super effective, like dodging or anything like that. You could use it for that, but it's not always necessary. Minimal clips I would also put into A tier. This one's really good. Larger clip size, faster reloads. Both those are really good for the M1000. The M1000 already hits pretty hard. Makes it so you can already one-shot headshot normal grunts without needing any overclocks on it. And you can one-shot, focus shot, body shot enemies, or at least regular grunts, without any overclocks on it either. You do need the armor breaking on it, but other than that, the M1000 will take care of it. So minimal clips just gives you a nice buff to that. Active stability system I'm going to put into B tier. It's nice. Faster focus speed is good, and the focus movement speed is okay. I've never really held the focus shot for very long to really need the bonus movement speed, but the extra focus speed is nice. Longer reloads is kind of annoying though, so that's why I think it's B tier. Hipster is just S tier. Hipster is one of the best overclocks in the entire game. Tons of extra bullets, faster rate of fire, very low recoil on the gun. The downside is that you lose out on damage. The damage is not even necessary. You can still build Hipster however you'd like. You can build it for focus shots. You can build it for spam fire. You can build it for one-shot headshots on normal grunts. It deals tons of damage per second against anything. And it's really, really good. Electrifying focus shot, I'd also put into B tier. This one's not too bad. It's similar to electric reload though. You get less focus shot damage, but all of your focus shots now electrocute enemies, which deals damage over time. That's not so bad if you want to go with like blow-through rounds and hit through multiple enemies with it, then it still does pretty well against crowds. But you could run the same thing with minimal clips or Hipster and get probably better results than this. Super cooling chamber, still probably C tier. does really well against certain enemies. You can really hit Nemesis hard, you can hit Oppressors hard, Detonators hard, Dreadnoughts hard. The downsides, though, are just too much for Super Cooling Chamber, because you get 125% more focus shot damage than you normally would, but it's only for the focus shots, not for your regular shots. You get a lot less ammo, you get less focus speed, and you can't move while you're focusing. Those are all pretty big downsides to the rifle. Yes, you can make up for not being able to move that much by just using your grappling hook and getting far away from enemies and then hitting them. Even so, there are times where enemies will move in weird spots. Alright, then we move on to the Drac, where some of these haven't been updated yet. So we have Impact Deflection here, which Impact Deflection is no longer a clean overclock. Now it is an it's a balanced overclock. It has a less rate of fire, but you have bouncy rounds. This is really good for taking out crowds. You can pair it with Plasma Splash, and it's probably Scout's best option for killing crowds, especially if you really hate swarmers. This one's really good. I'd put this one up into A tier bordering on S tier. Impact Deflection is honestly really, really good. So if you are getting for S tier, I would understand. Thermal Liquid Coolant is also really good. This one just gives you a faster cooling rate and less heat buildup per shot. Really good, A tier. Then we have Rewire Mod, which this one also got buffed for some odd reason. This one makes it so anytime you overheat your gun, you regenerate ammo back for it. Your overheat duration is longer and your battery capacity is less, but you will get a ton more ammo overall. So if you can space it out a lot, you can pretty much have infinite ammo with Rewire Mod, or at least it feels like you have infinite ammo with Rewire Mod. It's really not good on missions where you have to protect the point, though. It's not great on salvage missions, nor is it great on escort missions. I'd put this one up into B tier. If you really like using it, and you can use it fairly often, or you switch between your primary and secondary pretty often, you could say it's A tier. I would completely understand that. For me, though, it's like B tier. It works really well in certain missions, and if you just don't want to run out of bullets, you can, but the downtime for it each time just feels kind of sluggish to me rather than some of the other overclocks. Aggressive Venting is now no longer a balanced, it's now a clean overclock, where it doesn't really have its downside. If you overheat the gun, it deals fire damage to all enemies nearby. It has a faster recharge on that overheat, so you don't have as much downtime, and the fire still fears all enemies. This one's really good. I would say this one's also A tier. Then we have Overtuned Particle Accelerator. This one gives you more direct damage, less battery overall, your heat builds up faster, and you have a lot more base spread. That being said, you can still build it in so many ways. It's your highest damaging or highest DPS build for the Drac, and one of the highest for Scout in general. It's just that you're restricted to pretty much close to medium range. Outside of that range, it's just too inaccurate for you to hit anything instead of really big targets. But so long as you can maintain that close range, which isn't too bad with Scout, then it can do really well. And if you pair it with something like the crossbow now that has really long range, it's not a bad option. I'd put this one up into A tier. You could say it's S tier if you pair it with like quick fire from the crossbow, which I would probably say so because it's really good then. And then just use this for like close to medium range, and just use the crossbow for like medium to long range. Shield Battery Booster. This is another overclock that just doesn't really suit me that well. It is good, and I'm going to put it up into B tier. People that really like it, it's probably up into A tier for them, because it does have a good chance of being very useful. On certain mission types, it's really bad. Don't take it on like Shield Disruption, because then you don't really get much of an upside to it. This one increases your damage as well as projectile speed while your shields are at full. You also get a bonus rate of fire, which doesn't matter if your shields are up or not. And you also get slightly more ammo capacity, which that also doesn't matter if your shields are up or not. But if you do overheat this, your shields are then broken. So your shield is then broken, your overheat duration is longer, your cooling rate is worse, and your heat per shot is worse, so it's easier to overheat this. Now, if you overheat this and you don't have a shield, or you barely have a shield, doesn't really matter. But then if you're missing any part of your shield, you do not get your full bonus. For me, it's just I take so much damage so often in this game, especially on like Haz 5, where it's just so easy to take fall damage. It's really easy to potentially get hit by like acid from the mushrooms, or I guess gas from the mushrooms, potentially get hit by friendly fire. There's just so many things that make it so Shield Battery Booster is not a tempting option for me. Then we have Thermal Exhaust Feedback. I'd put this one up into A tier. This one's pretty good. This one makes it so once you build up heat so much, you start putting fire on your shots. Your overheat duration is worse with this, and your heat per shot buildup is much higher, so you do have to manage that because it can be easy to overheat your gun. But the amount of damage that you can get out of the fire is pretty nice, and with more enemies being weak to fire, it's a pretty good option. Now we move on to the Boomstick, where we have Compact Shells. Compact Shells, I'd say, is A tier. This is more ammo and a faster reload. Great things for the Boomstick. Not really much else to say there. Double barrel. This one's D tier. This one's still D tier. This one gives you 1 more point of damage, but it makes it so every time that you fire, you have to fire out both barrels, and there's just not really a reason to take this because all of the other overclocks are better than this one. All of them will get you more damage than this without you being forced into firing out both barrels. Even something like compact shells will still get you more damage because you have more ammo. You also have stuffed shells here, which is just really hard to pass up because this also gives you 1 point of damage, but 1 more pellet for each of them, and you have a tier 2 option where you can just make the gun fire pretty much both barrels one right after another super fast. So there's not really a point in taking double barrel. It just isn't a great overclock right now. It should really be buffed in some way. If you're forced to fire out both barrels, it should give you more than just 1 damage. Special powder. Special powder is S tier. Special powder is one of the best overclocks and one of the most fun overclocks in the game. This one makes it so you can shotgun jump. You point your gun at the ground, jump into the air, fire the shotgun, you go flying in the opposite direction. Lets you get out of bad situations, lets you get up to certain areas better. It can make it so you don't take fall damage. It's just really nice to have in combination with your grappling hook. It makes it so Scout is super mobile and can get out of just about any situation. It's really good on certain maps where you have really big locations too. Stuffed shells, I would also say, is A tier. 1 more point of damage, 1 more pellet for all of your shells. Gets you a lot more damage overall. So that one's really good. Shaped shells actually got changed in this patch. This one has 50% less spread, but it used to be that you had one less pellet every time you fired, which was still pretty good. But now it has less ammo overall, which is also pretty good. I would say that is a buff over having less pellets, because now you do have more effective damage, and you can put all those pellets onto a target much easier. So I think I'd put this one up into A tier. It feels really good. There is still a bug going on with this where you don't get the correct crosshairs. For some reason, it's always the normal set that the double barrel has, where it should be smaller. Then we've got jumbo shells. This gives us a lot more damage per shot, but we get less ammo and we have a longer reload. This one's definitely A tier. This one makes it so you can deal tons of damage to any big target really fast. It pairs really well with just about anything for the Drac, just because the Drac doesn't have a bunch of like upfront damage unless you're using Overtuned Particle Accelerator, where jumbo shells gives you a ton of upfront damage. So if you need to hit a Praetorian in the face or in the weak spot or an Oppressor in the weak spot, you can kill him really quick with this. Same with like Dreadnoughts. Then we move on to the Zhukovs, where we got minimal clips or minimal magazines. This one I'd put into B tier. Faster rate of fire, bonus reload. It's just a nice clean overclock. Custom casings gives us more ammo overall, but less rate of fire. That's not a big deal with the Zhukovs, honestly, but the rate of fire is not that noticeable. The Zhukovs already shoot really fast, and having more magazine size makes it so you're not running through ammo as quick as you normally would, or at least it doesn't feel like you're running through it as quick as you normally would. Cryo minelets, I'm going to put up into A tier. They're really good against crowds, especially if you have blow-through rounds where you can hit through enemies and then freeze them. This puts cryo mines on the ground. These explode, freezing enemies around them, or at least building up freeze around them. So you can freeze multiple targets with this, which is great. Downsides are that you have slightly less damage and slightly less magazine size. Downsides are pretty minimal, and the upside is really good. Embedded detonators, I'm just going to put these up into S tier. These ones, you get a lot less damage, a lot less mag size, and a lot less total ammo. But you get the embedded detonators that once you go to reload, just explode inside the enemy. You build it all for ammo. You don't care about the extra damage because the explosives are doing so much damage to them. And you can just shred through big targets really fast. And then we have gas recycling. Gas recycling I put up in A tier. Gas recycling gives you a lot more damage for the submachine guns. However, you lose out on weak spot bonus damage. This is only for the bonus damage. This is not for the weak spot damage in total. That, for whatever reason, is easy to understand, probably because of the way that it's worded. You'll still do double damage when you hit most things weak spot, or triple damage for most things weak spot, depending on what type of enemy it is. You just won't do the extra 15% damage that the Zhukovs have on them base from this. So you still usually get more damage out of gas recycling than what you lose. You do have more base spread, which can be a little bit annoying, and you can't move as fast when using these. You're locked into 50% movement speed. That being said, they still shred through enemies really fast, especially if you build them for the electric Zhukovs and with the IFG. Then we move on to the crossbow, where we have quickfire. Quickfire is really good. I'd put this one up into A tier. Faster reload speed, faster velocity are two things that the crossbow needs, and this gives them both, so it feels really good to have. Up next, we have specialist. This gives you more special bolts and longer special duration on those, or longer duration on those special effects. So pheromone bolts, the explosive chemical bolts, and the electric bolts. All of those are really nice to use. Some of them are really strong. You can have a ton of pheromone bolts. This one's probably A tier as well, especially if you like using those secondary bolts and you like using this more in a supportive way. Works really good if you like using Bullets of Mercy. Or if you want to take this on like a Dreadnought mission with the electric bolts, just slow everything down a bunch. Cryo bolts, I think I'm going to put into B tier as well as fire bolts. This one gives you less damage for each of your shots. However, they have either the fire or the cryo effect. This goes over time though. This isn't instant like the fire or the cryo grenades. So they build up over time, which can be really useful on certain enemies. You can no longer pick these bolts back up though. That can be a little bit of an issue, but if you combine it with the pheromone bolts, you can light a bunch of enemies on fire, you can freeze a bunch of enemies. You can also build up heat over time on robots, so like on Nemesis, especially if your team is trying to build up heat on them. This one can work really well. The cryo bolt can also work really well. It just depends. Bodkin points I think I'm going to put up into A tier. I don't think they're quite S tier. They're really good though. They make it so all your normal bolts now will hit an enemy and then try to bounce into 2 other enemies. This just spreads out your damage. You do lose direct damage, but you usually gain more damage overall because you're hitting multiple enemies. And if you build for damage, these can still one-shot, body shot normal grunts. The other downside to this is that you get a slower reload, which does kind of suck, but it's not too bad. Then we have the Trifork Volley. I'd also put this one up into A tier. This makes it so you shoot out 3 of your bolts rather than just 1 bolt. You have more ammo capacity overall, but your bolts are no longer retrievable. You do less damage per bolt, and you also have a longer reload. If you build this with magnetic shafts, electric bolts, and IFGs, it makes it so you can do really high burst damage to big targets like Dreadnoughts or Praetorians, Oppressors, whatever it might be. And it works really well at close range. It can work really well against crowds. You don't want to be using this at like long range though, just because it's going to be really difficult to line up 3 of these shots to actually hit 3 different things. And then we move on to Engineer, where we have Stunner first for the Warthog. Stunner I'm going to put into C tier just because I don't really like it that much. And this is one that I have a bias towards too, I will say. This one is honestly a really good overclock. It's not bad at all, but it's just not one that I really care for, and I don't really care to use it with the Warthog. This one increases our chance to stun enemies with the shotgun, as well as we get 30% more damage against stunned enemies, so we don't even need to stun them. But even so, the stun chance is just kind of random with the shotgun at times, it feels like. Every time I run this, I'm never super impressed with it, and I would rather take the other overclocks with it. Then we've got lightweight magazines. This one gives us more ammo and a faster reload. This one's really good. I'd put this one up into A tier. It's all around a solid overclock for the shotgun and makes the shotgun feel way more consistent. Then we have magnetic pelt alignment. This one decreases our base spread and increases our weak spot damage, but our rate of fire is much lower. This one I'd also say is A tier. It's really good. You can build it for full damage and do high damage towards certain targets. You can build it more for general purpose and just deal more damage to regular enemies and more consistently one-shot enemies. So it's good. We got Cycle Overload. This one increases our base spread by quite a bit, and we have a longer reload. But we have a much faster rate of fire and more damage per shot. Really good. I'd put this one up into A tier. It's super fun to run full rate of fire with this and just empty out the magazine in just a few seconds. It shreds through big enemies at close range too, but it doesn't make your shotgun so it is pretty much just for close range. Out to medium range is where some of your pellets are just going everywhere. And then we got mini shells, which I'd also put up into A tier. Mini shells gets you a lot more ammo, larger magazine size, and less recoil. Our downsides are that we get our damage cut down by a decent amount. We no longer have any stun chance, but you can build this for more general purpose, and mini shells is definitely like S tier if you're taking it on a critical weakness mission where you have 5 times bonus weak spot damage, where your damage just skyrockets with these things. Then you can just build like full ammo and have like 220 shells or something like that with it. Then we move on to Stubby's Overclocks, where we got super slim rounds. This one increases your magazine size and decreases your base spread. Both great. I would put this one up into B tier. Feels really good on Stubby. We got Well-Oiled Machine, which gives us a faster reload and a faster rate of fire. Also B tier, feels great on Stubby. Nothing but bonuses here. We got the Refire Booster next. This one's definitely A tier. This one increases your rate of fire by a lot, increases your base spread by a decent amount, and also gives you electricity damage per shot. This makes it so Stubby feels really consistent for proccing electricity. And you can really build a Refire Booster however you'd like though. It works really well either way. And it works well as like a general purpose weapon then for just spraying at enemies. Not so great at longer ranges, but Stubby's already not way great at longer ranges. It is really good at medium range and close range. Then we've got lightweight cases, probably another B tier overclock. This one gives you a lot more ammo, but we cut down on damage and rate of fire. This is good if you want to take it with like a high damage secondary, if you want to take it with like nukes or something to where you still have a gun that has a lot of bullets that you're going to be using most of the time. Turret arc, I think I'm going to put into C tier. Some people will say turret arc is amazing, and I can agree with that. Because if you set it up in time and if you get really used to using turret arc, it can be really good. But there are times where turret arc just doesn't work out super great because the bugs might have weird pathing. Teammates might be moving around a lot. It's really good on like hold the point areas though. So if you like taking it on an escort mission or a salvage mission, it can be really, really good there. Even on like a dreadnought mission where you can force the dreadnought through it and they're taking damage over time and getting that massive slowdown on them, it can be really strong. Downsides are we lose out on rate of fire with our submachine gun and maximum ammo, so Stubby becomes not a great option for killing enemies by itself because you can run through ammo a little bit quicker and it's just not killing things as quick as it otherwise would be. So it's more of a specialized overclock, and that's why I put it here in C tier. Turret EM discharge I'd probably put up into A tier. This one's pretty good. This one is a lot more forgiving than turret arc because you can proc it multiple times pretty fast. You lose out on magazine size, which doesn't really matter with Stubby, and you lose out on damage, which that one does kind of matter because you, again, won't be using Stubby as a weapon as effectively as you normally would. But turret EM discharge gives you a lot more damage on your turrets when you're shooting them, and it explodes in a big area, hitting all enemies, slowing down all enemies, dealing a lot of damage. It does really well against crowds, and it can work really well against big targets too. Then we move on to Loki, where first up we have Eraser. This one increases your magazine size slightly and increases the max amount of targets that you can lock onto. Pretty good overclock. I'd put this one into B tier. There's not a whole lot to say about it. It's just another nice, like, clean overclock. Armor breaking module gives you the maximum amount of armor breaking once you are fully locked onto an enemy, which is great. If you need to knock the armor off enemies, this is good and it doesn't come with any downside, so B tier. Explosive chemical rounds is an easy S tier. This one's really strong. You get explosive chemical rounds on every third shot, so you just want to lock onto 3 and then let go. That way you can set off this explosive. You lose out on damage and you lose out on total max ammo, which isn't that big of a deal. The explosions will give you a lot of AoE damage as well as they deal damage to everything because the explosive doesn't care if the enemy has armor or anything. And it makes it so clearing up crowds is really fast. Seeker rounds I would say is A tier. This one gives you pretty much wall hacks. I guess you get wall hacks plus aimbot. Now you get less rate of fire overall, which is kind of annoying, and you get a slightly longer reload, which isn't so bad. But you have seeker rounds that go through walls, go through enemies, go through just everything to hit where they're aiming. So if it's a regular dreadnought, you can just aim directly at it, even if it's coming towards you, and just fire right through and you will hit the weak spot. That works for, I guess, all the dreadnoughts, at least once they are to that stage. And then we have Executioner, which I'm just going to put Executioner also into S tier. It's either high A tier or low S tier. Executioner is really good. You get 50% more weak spot damage than you normally do, at least at full locks. Your lock-on time is also cut in half, so you can lock on even faster, and you have less locks, so you can lock on even faster, which that is counted as a downside for some reason. The other downsides are you have slightly less ammo by 12 and slightly less magazine size by 12. But the amount of damage that you get out of this is just crazy for dealing with single targets, especially if you're really used to lining up the lines on weak spots on the enemies. Executioner is really good. Then we have Neuro Lasso, which I'd also probably put into B tier. Neuro Lasso can be good. Whenever you have the lines onto an enemy, they slow them down. Your lock-ons are slower, and you can't lock on as long, where you could just hold on to an enemy forever. Now you actually will start decaying those lock-ons. Now we move on to the Grenade Launcher, where we have the Clean Sweep. This just gives us more area damage and larger AoE. This one's really good, no downsides, B tier like a lot of the clean overclocks. Pack Rat gives us 2 more ammo. I'm also going to put that one to B tier. It's like one of the most basic overclocks, but it's still really good. 2 more shots of the Grenade Launcher is always welcome. Compact Rounds gives you 5 more ammo with the Grenade Launcher. Lowers your area damage slightly and lowers your area radius slightly. I'd probably also put this one into B tier. It's still pretty good. You still get a lot of shots with the Grenade Launcher. It's still really good for crowds. RJ250 Compound I'm going to put up into S tier. It gives engineer mobility that you otherwise don't have, which is nice, since you can now rocket jump. You lose out on area damage, which will hurt against certain enemies. You can still kill regular groups of enemies, even without going with damage with the RJ250 if you go with like fire or something. Just deal damage over time, and you get a ton more ammo as well as a lot faster reload, so it's pretty nice there. Fat Boy, I'm also just going to put this into S tier for nukes. Even if you only get a couple nukes, they still clear up an entire horde just with 1 shot, which is really good. You get tons of area damage, a big area, AoE damage over time with the nuclear radiation, which could also be a negative. You just lose out on velocity and you lose out on max ammo by a lot. Hyper-propellant is also another S tier. So much damage per shot. You turn your grenade launcher into a railgun. You get tons of direct damage. You get a super fast moving projectile. You do lose out on ammo. You do lose out on explosion radius. It's no longer an AoE weapon. It's a single target damage weapon. Then we move on to the breach cutter, where we have lightweight cases. This one gives us more max ammo and a faster reload. This one's also probably S tier. This one might be one of the most boring overclocks, at least in S tier, because it's just what I said it did. Slightly more ammo, but when the breach cutter already hits crazy hard, it doesn't really need anything but ammo. So that's why I put it up here into S tier, just because it makes your breach cutter more consistent and work better against everything that it already works really well against. Roll control, I'm going to put into C tier this time around, because you could argue whether it's a buff or not. It lets you rotate the beam when you're firing out the breach cutter. That's all it does. No downside. You could argue that's not necessarily an upside either. But you can potentially hit more enemies or hit them differently. So C tier seems fair for me, at least right now. Stronger plasma current I put into B tier. This one just gives you more damage and gives you a slightly longer lifetime on your projectile. Neither of which you really need with the breach cutter, but both of which are good. So I think that's why I'd put it in B tier. Return to sender, I'm going to put into A tier. This one lets you recall your line so you can shoot it out, call it back. You lose out on total ammo, though. You can essentially hit the same enemy or multiple enemies with the same shot twice. High voltage crossover, I'll also put into A tier. Downside is that you have a slightly smaller magazine size, which doesn't really matter. High voltage crossover makes it so when you hit enemies, it deals electric damage to them, which deals damage over time, which is okay. It's not super necessary. You're probably going to be killing stuff right away with this, especially if you're taking it with like the plasma trail, but this will add a little bit more damage over time to them and can synergize well with Stubby, or if you have a scout running like the Zhukovs or something where you want electricity damage on stuff. Spinning death I'm going to put into B tier. Spinning death can be really good in certain areas. Put a blender up that chops through everything. You have a long lasting beam, you have a big beam, but you have a very short range beam. It's not great against all enemy types. Certain enemies might just run right out of it and you don't do a whole lot of damage to them. You want to usually put the stun on this so you do extra damage, and you want to put like plasma trail on it so as it's cutting there, it's also doing more damage over time. Downsides are that you do lose damage per second by quite a bit on this. You lose out on maximum ammo and you lose out on magazine size by a lot. Usually only have like one shot with this, then you got to reload it. Inferno I'm also going to put into B tier. Since fire got buffed, Inferno has just gotten better. This one makes it so all of your shots pretty much have a guaranteed chance of lighting things on fire, or very near chance of lighting things on fire. You do lose out on damage per second, which doesn't matter too much because the damage with fire will likely build that back up, as well as you're already doing really high damage with the breach cutter in the first place. And you lose out on armor breaking, but that doesn't always matter either if you can light enemies on fire like the robots, where they'll just die right away. And then our last weapon with overclocks is the shard diffractor. First up, we have efficiency tweaks. This gives us more ammo and more charge capacity. That's really good, and I'd put it up into A tier. It's probably the overclock I've used the most with the shard diffractor right now. It just feels nice to have. Shard diffractor's already pretty good at taking care of big things, and now you can use it a little bit more often to hit smaller enemies or just to keep killing those big things. However you want to use it. Next up is automated beam controller. This one gives us more ammo and a faster rate of fire, as well as a slightly faster reload or recharge time. But we lose out on overall ammo, and our beam continues to fire until we either manually cut it off or until we're empty. If you manually cut it off, 50% of your remaining charge is forfeited, so you can't run through ammo with that. This is essentially the overclock that brings the breach cutter back to where the breach cutter was when it was first released on the beta. And for this, it's okay. I'd put it into B tier. You can kill big things quicker this way, which is nice, but it still feels awkward to use. You can't dash cancel out of this either. If you get locked into it, then you will have to pickaxe cancel before you can dash. Where most other weapons, you can dash cancel out of their animation and run away. This one will not let you. You can still dash, but it'll still be firing and you'll be slightly moving faster. Then we have feedback loop, which makes it so when you're hitting an enemy or hitting an area, well, I guess it's when you're hitting an enemy, then it builds up the area over time that's dealing more damage to other enemies around it. The problem with that is that I found that the shard diffractor doesn't do as well against crowds as the grenade launcher or the breach cutter. It doesn't do that job as well, and losing out on 100 total charge is kind of bad. You will run through ammo pretty fast with this, and just having it more for crowds is not way great. If you take it with the biomass converter in tier 5, it is more manageable. You will get more ammo refunded to you. And if you are just using this against crowds and maybe you have a really high single target damage weapon, like you're running Executioner Loki, it can be decent. But other than that, I think I'd put this one into C tier. It's just not as great as some of the other things for the Shard Diffractor or for the Engineer secondaries, in my opinion. Then we have Volatile Impact Reactor. This one I'm going to put into A tier, though. This one's really good, even though it is more for crowd control. This one makes it so whenever you hit the terrain, you build up magma on the terrain. This deals damage over time, and it slows down enemies. It can also light enemies on fire. Works very similar to like sticky flames from the Flamethrower. Downsides are that you lose out on the charge shot radius, and you lose out on the charge shot capacity, which aren't too big of a deal, because at least you can use this the same way you normally would, or you can use this against crowds, and then if you sweep it across there and still don't hit, you can still leave the magma down, which will deal more damage over time, slow things down, and burn them. Then for our unstable overclocks, we have the Endothermic Explosion. This one makes it so when we're firing at one of our platforms, if we shoot at it long enough, it will blow up and deal damage to all enemies around it, as well as deal area damage, or at least terrain damage, so you can somewhat mine with this. It's not as good as like mining with Fat Boy if you want to mine with an overclock. This one will also make it so anytime that you hit your platform, you're dealing more area damage to all enemies around it too. This can by itself clear up small crowds very fast. Even big crowds of smaller enemies, it can clear up really quick. Downsides are we lose out on total capacity, which isn't so bad. And we also lose out on recharge rate, which isn't too bad either. Overall, I think I'd put this one in B tier. It is more situational, but it can be really good in certain situations. And the more comfortable you are between switching from platform gun to this, I imagine the better you're going to use it. But for me right now, I think I'd put it into B tier. And then our last overclock is the Overdrive Booster. This one makes it so you can switch on the Overdrive Booster by pushing R once you're firing the weapon, where you deal extra damage and you consume more ammo than you normally would. However, once you are boosting, you cannot move. So it's similar to the supercooling chamber where you can't move anymore. And you have a longer recharge after boosting, as well as the boosted beam continues to fire until you are fully discharged, or you cancel it with a pickaxe, where then again 50% of your total charge is then forfeited, or at least remaining charge is then forfeited, so you can lose out on ammo. This one I'd probably put up into S tier though. This one's really good. This one lets you deal a lot of damage, and it's not even required for you to switch this on. So even if you just want to use the Shard Diffractor as is, you can. You don't have to use this. It works really well against dreadnoughts though. You flip this on and you just deal tons of damage per second to those enemies. So I think this is my complete list of all the overclocks in Deep Rock, at least as of right now. Tell me your thoughts. There's a ton of really good overclocks in Deep Rock. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I didn't go into nearly as much detail as the last tier list. If you would like me to go into more detail, maybe I'll do some other lists at some point. Probably not right away. Or at least talk about each of the overclocks individually. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this. If you'd like to be a part of it, you can. There are links down in the description. Thanks everybody for doing that. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye!